You note in a recent talk that at a past job at EMI Music, you walked in the door into a basically data-free environment. As a data scientist, how did you approach that situation and what was that experience like?
I approached that situation very cautiously. One of the things I did in my early days was actually negotiating digital distribution deals, and so I was actually doing business development. And I found that even if I had a more kind of quantitative or data-driven way of going about the negotiation and finding out what the other person's position was, it was in my interest to hide it, basically. So I did a lot of things my own way, my own analytical way, but I kind of dressed them up as business judgment and intuition. And I found that that tactic actually works in a lot of different situations. When I moved into ever-increasing statistical roles, often starting with this kind of veneer of common sense makes it a lot more approachable. And I never really, and I think I see a lot of my role as being a translator. And for the most part, I don't expect the other side to speak my language. I expect that I have to become the bilingual one and figure out how to address them on their terms.
Well, that's interesting. And so one of the techniques you used at EMI was data mashups. And it's a strategy that you're using now at ShopKeep.
Yeah.
What kinds of data are you mashing up and what kinds of results are you seeing?
Yeah, at ShopKeep we have an amazing data set that's really interesting in its specificity. We can see what's coming in the back of the store, all the supplies coming into coffee shops and restaurants, and we can see what's going out the front of the store to a level of detail down to the receipt level that a lot of financial services companies would be very envious of. And so what I'm looking to do, because we're still growth stage and we only have so much coverage, is really mash up our data with lists that have broader coverage. I'm not looking so much for other networks or other lists that are as deep as ours, but really kind of going for that coverage. So a lot of location data is really interesting to us. A lot of, in the US, there's just a wealth of kind of review data about retailers, about restaurants, about store, all those kinds of things. And so those generally have very wide coverage. And so we're finding that that's really where the value is and really the points of difference between the two data sets.
That's interesting. And so ShopKeep is sort of a new situation for you. And what challenges are you facing right now?
Yeah, there's a lot of the basics to work on. This company has grown. Our origin story is our founder ran a retail store. He ran a wine store in Brooklyn and built this whole point of sale for the purposes of, for what he needed. And this business has grown over time. I think everybody always imagined that the data was going to be interesting, but didn't necessarily, it's not a data business first. We serve independent business owners first. And so there's just a whole bunch of things around instrumentation, around really collecting the data. This is all passing by us and we're collecting most of it, but there's just a lot that we can do to really just start, especially given how cheap data storage is and how cheap collecting the data is. And now that we're at a certain scale, just going back and instrumenting all the things we mean to do. So it's pretty straightforward. And also, even in a small company, sometimes you end up with these inadvertent little silos. And so just that old-fashioned, relational databasing, connecting tables, one customer ID over here, another type of customer ID over there, and getting the decoder ring. A lot of those fundamentals apply in the early stages of getting your data infrastructure ready for the big things.
All right. Now, you've worked in a variety of companies in various stages of disarray. So there was EMI, which was basically data-free. There was American Express that you said had analysis paralysis.
Sometimes, yes.
Right,
Yeah.
And then ShopKeep is a startup,
right.
So you're sort of from the ground up.
Right.
What kind of advice would you offer data scientists who are moving into a new situation?
Yeah, I think the most important thing for somebody who's very analytically inclined is to just never lose sight of the business side of things. If you're a one and only, a solo data scientist that got brought in and you're there on your own, they're going to be looking to you to add value. And one of the things I mentioned in my talk was actually really knowing what decisions you're going to work on. And so one of the things I think a lot of statisticians, econometricians, modelers forget is how big is the problem at hand, right? Are they working on 1% of the business? Are they working on something that's 80% of the business? And so one of the advice I would really give is make sure you really understand how the institution, whether it's a company or a for-profit, how the institution you work for adds value. Right? How you make whatever your customers happier, your constituents more pleased, your shareholders more, whatever the measure of success is, really understand what it is that that organization does that drives it. And it sounds really trite, but you know, people really do forget sometimes that they're working on a kind of a corner edge case, and they do a lot of fancy things for something that doesn't ultimately matter. One trick I often give data scientists who say I'm having a hard time working with business partners, they're always asking me for things, but I don't know if they're big or small, is ask them very politely, so if by building an algorithm, if we improve this decision that you're asking me to help with by 10%, you know, what would that mean to the bottom line? Even if you don't feel comfortable doing the math of figuring out, right, this, you know, this many more units times this price times this to the revenue, if the data scientist can ask the business person to say, you know, basically what's a 1% improvement worth on this problem, you'll be surprised by how different the answers are from one person to another on their problem. They usually have a vastly different number of zeros after it. Somebody's asked you for something and it's worth, you know, 2,000 pounds, and somebody else has asked you for something and it's worth 20 million pounds. It, order of magnitude comes into play very quickly, and ties are broken so easily that way.
All right, that's interesting. So I want to close our conversations today with a very broad question.
Sure.
What people or projects are you following? What kinds of things are you finding personally intriguing these days?
Yeah, so because I've taken on a new role in a company that has customers who have bricks and mortar locations, I find myself gravitating a lot towards the new sensors that are out there, kind of the consumer grade sensors. I find myself at home playing with Tile, you know, that little GPS tracker out of the US. Things like, I really am interested in the project that GE has going with Quirky, which is Wink. It's a series of sensors. You know, I'm kind of looking at all those things because, one, personally as a consumer, I tend to play with those a little bit, and the simpler the better. I'm not so interested in how they work, but in kind of the change that they bring about. And so now in my role, I think about our independent business owners, our merchants. They've got this physical space, and a lot of the data we see is through basically the point of sale, the IT infrastructure. But what are the opportunities, right, with sensors in their space, especially now that they're so cheap, again, right? The Internet of Things is as much about the cheapness of the sensor, right, how affordable they are, as well as connecting it all. So that really gets me going. And then another area I look at a lot is a lot around text and text mining, because I know almost nothing about it. And so I read up on it quite a bit because you know, I've seen some early instances in some of my roles where that's become a really great source of insight. And I think back in the day, say 10 years ago, you would just kind of shrug your shoulders and give up on text. So I'm trying to learn a little bit more about the modern techniques for text mining.
Well, excellent. Thank you very much for talking with me today.
Thank you, Jen.